The next thing you have to do is develop a plan for how you're going to make a segmented or an open segmented piece. And you can do that with a piece of paper and a pencil, and draw it all out, make lines for each of the rows that you're going to make, and determine all your segments on paper. I personally don't do that. I use a computer program, which I find extremely useful. And actually, I find it useful for all kinds of wood turning that I do, not just segmented. Because I also often play with the design in that program. So I found it to be one of the most economical tools that I could have purchased as a wood turner. I prepared a handout for everybody, which either you have or will get, or it'll be on the website, or all of the above. And in it, I list the website and the different products that I've found useful. They certainly are not the only ones out there, but they're the ones that I've found useful in creating the work that I do. And for developing plans, I find Woodturner Pro to be the very best. It's actually now it's a 4-program suite, and it has Design Pro, Woodturner Pro, and Lamination Pro, if you wanted to make laminations. And they have a new one, which, quite frankly, I don't have, and I can't remember what the name of it is, but it's another one for making segmented pieces. I use Design Pro and Woodturner Pro most of the time. Design Pro is a great piece, and Jared, if you would like, you could put on the screen. This is the little bowl that I designed for this project. And you'll notice that the actual bowl is the little lines that are in the piece, and that are connected by little dots. And you're able to take your cursor over those dots and change them around and fine-tune the shape of your bowl. You first do a design in Design Pro, and you just get the basic shape of the bowl. But what's nice about the tool is that in a second screen right next to the one where you're designing the piece, you're actually seeing it in 3D. And you can turn it in every which direction and get a feel for what it's going to look like from all different viewpoints. Once you have the basic design down, you then move it into Woodturner Pro, and it's a very easy process. The design in Woodturner Pro is the one that was up on the screen. You can still change the design once it's in Woodturner Pro by moving those little dots around, and it has different views. I chose to make this piece with 12 segments in each of 7 rows. Actually, it's a disc on the bottom, and then there's 6 rows of open segment pieces, and the top row is a closed segment piece. You can manipulate how many segments you want by just changing a number in the program. So you can make it 16 segments or 24 segments or whatever number you'd like. 12 is simple and easy for a demonstration. The next slide is another view, and this shows the actual segments. And again, you can change those dots to change how wide you want the segments to be. There's a number of ways you can manipulate that. But it gives you an idea from a side or a cross-section view of your piece what it's going to look like. And then the third slide, the computer program gives you a cutting schedule. And it's particularly easy to look at upside down. Here in the cutting schedule, you have on the far left, you have the row numbers from number 1, which is the bottom disc, up to the top. It will tell you what woods you've selected, and you can actually paint different wood looks into your computer. How many segments are in that piece or in that row. It shows you the height of each segment. In this case, each segment is 3/4 of an inch, except for the top one and the bottom one. I had 1/2 inch. It then gives you additional information like the outside diameter, the inside diameter, the edge length, and I'll show you this in a little different drawing in a minute. When you're making a open segmented piece, there's 2 ways that you can orient the segments. One, you can put a vertical spacer in.
What the actual pieces? I'll put you on camera.
Pardon?
Can you demonstrate with the actual pieces?
Yeah, sure. In this particular piece, I designed it with the openings between segments being 1/8 of an inch throughout the whole piece. So you'll notice that all the segments have the same width. With that Woodturner Pro program, you can just put in vertical spacer 1/8 of an inch, and it'll automatically put that into your cutting schedule. And therefore, the segments in between the spaces will give you the accurate dimensions for making the piece. If you change one setting in the program, you then can design a piece that looks more like this one, where the segments are different at every row. So instead of a 1/8 inch space, you end up with a different space throughout the whole bowl, which gives you just totally different look. But it's so easy to do with Woodturner Pro, because all you basically do is change one setting, and it gives it to you. So then it'll tell you what the opening or the width of each of the segments is in order to create this kind of vessel. One of the things I forgot to mention when we first started was if you have questions along the way, there's a chat button on the bottom of your screen. And if you press that, you can ask a question in a screen that comes up on your computer. And Jerry can keep track of those and will ask me those questions, and I'd be happy to answer them real time. So in planning your piece, you can plan the number of rows, you can plan the number of segments in a row, you can make it proportional, or you can make it even spaces between each of the segments. And those all go into the design of the piece. So I would encourage everybody to, if they can, to get Woodturner Pro and 3D Pro. I think the whole package is $139, which is a fair amount of money, but I've used it now for 6 years and I've made hundreds of plans. So when you look at it from that perspective, it's a reasonable investment. And Lyle, I forgot the name of the person who came up with it, but he's a very accessible person. You can call him on the phone. He will answer all your questions. He's at most of the wood turning club meeting or demonstrations and symposia showing how his programs work. He's just a really nice guy. Okay, the next thing I was going to do was show you how you actually make the segments. And you have to create a cutting schedule, either yourself or with a program. And there's some critical dimensions that are important in segmenting. This is one segment. It's got a longer dimension, of course, in the front, and a shorter one in the back. And that angle is determined by the number of segments that you want to have in your piece. 12 segments happens to work out to a 15-degree angle that you have to cut your segments at. The critical dimensions are the edge length, which is printed out on the cutting schedule automatically. You get the board thickness, which is how wide it is, and that can be altered in your plan depending on how much extra room you want in order to give yourself some room so that you end up with an adequate wall thickness on your piece. I'm sorry, that's the board width. The board thickness is how large each row is of your segments, and the miter angle. Those 4 dimensions are particularly important. You then have to prepare strips of wood to be cut into angles, pieces. There, the critical dimension is the board width and the board thickness. When you're making a closed segment bowl, your board thickness, the height of each row, what I recommend is you make each of those a 1/16 to 3/32 of an inch taller than the finished ring that you want. This gives you some room to flatten those rings once you've put them together. And I'll do one here shortly and you'll see. And of course, to flatten them, there's many alternatives. The easiest and nicest is having a drum sander. You can run them through the drum sander and it'll flatten one side, you flip it over, flatten the other side, and then you can adjust the drum sander to bring it down to the actual thickness that you want. For instance, in this case, it's 3/4 of an inch. It's harder to do that when you have an open segmented bowl because you can't run the rings through a planer or a drum sander. And it's risky to try to flatten those rings when they're on the lathe with any kind of a tool. So the only thing you can use is a sanding board, and it's hard to get a lot of material off on a sanding board. So when you're cutting your strips, and these are a bunch of strips that were left over from this piece that I actually finished last night. And what I had to do with these strips is cut my board to the correct board thickness, and then, or I'm sorry, to the correct board width. So I had a whole bunch of strips, and I usually cut all my strips before I start to cut any segments or do anything else on the bowl. So what I end up with is in that cutting schedule that you saw, one of the dimensions is board width. And so I cut enough strips to get the number of segments that I need. Again, the program is handy because it gives you what's called the economy board length. So in order to get 12 segments of row 7, I need a board that's at least 9 7/8 inch long. I usually make it 2 or 3 segments longer than that, so that when I make a mistake, which I inevitably do every once in a while, I've got enough board width or board length to make the number of strips I want. But when I'm done cutting my strips, I'll have all, in this case, 7 groups of strips laid out on a table so that I have adequate amount of wood to make the number of segments that I need. It gets a little more complex with one like this that has 36 rows. Then I have 36 little piles of wood, one for each row, giving myself extra board length so that I can cut an extra segment or 2 in case something goes wrong during the process. For open segment work, the board thickness is then the next really important thing. Because you can't sand them in a drum sander, you've got to cut them as close as you can together. So when I use more than one variety of wood, like in this bowl or this bowl, I cut both the light one, in this case spalted tamarind, and the wenge. I cut my strips at the same time so that my board height is exactly the same. So when I glue them on, I'm really close to having that 3/4 inch all the way around. And I do that for all my strips. I get them to the right board height before I even start cutting segments. Now I've got a table full of strips, hopefully adequate number to cut the number of segments I want. I use a sled on my table saw to cut individual segments, and I brought it along today. This is called a wedgie sled. And I believe Jerry Bennett came up with this concept. And it's all available on a website. And I have it listed in my handout. And these sleds, you can purchase or you can make your own. And they'll give you the plans for making your own sled. I made my first one just the way the plan said, and it worked out just great. I also purchased one, which in fact is this one, and it has a measuring device here in order to get the correct width of each segment, which is a little more precise than the one I had before. However, they both work very well. You can also, well, they also make it easy to cut your segments at the right angle for the number of pieces that you choose in your design. And what they sell are these wedgies, and each of these is at a little different angle. That one is 16 segments. And you put that between these two rails, loosen them, get that centered in there, and then tighten these down. And you've got your angles just perfect. I also use, and I don't know what the tool is, and I forgot to bring it, but it's an angle finder that I have that has a digital readout, and I set that for my, in this case, 22.5 degree angle, and I check this to make sure that it's totally accurate. The more accuracy you can build into this, the easier it is. Aha, David has one. It's one of these guys like this. I don't know which camera you're on.
This one.
Okay. And you set that to the degree you want, you tighten her down. You can put that on your sled and check to make sure that these got in the right place. If you start with one, get it perfect, put the wedgie in there, and then bring the other one down to the wedgie so it fits perfectly in there, you're going to have angles that are really accurate. The reason that's important when you do a closed segment bowl is that when you make these rings, they have to fit perfectly together in a circle. And the more accurate you can be in cutting your segments, you can then put those together all at one time, which we'll do in just a second. And then you don't have to make half rings and then put the half rings together after you've sanded them at a disc sander, which saves you a step and more opportunities to make errors. So this is a good investment. Again, there's a fellow by the name of Pete Markin who actually came up with the design of the wedgie sled, and he has them on his website. You can purchase one like I did here. He also has a new one that he has done on a, what do you call those machines that?
CNC.
Pardon?
CNC.
Yes,
CNC.
CNT,
CNC.
Computer.
whatever.
Yeah, CNC.
And he has it set up so that you can actually index each of these to the right size segment, and you don't need to purchase these, which again I'd recommend because they charge you too much for these. And I suppose it's not. I shouldn't say they charge you too much. I'm sure it costs money to make them. So you can save buying all these wedgies by buying a sled that has those indexed. And Pete says that they're totally accurate. I'm, in fact, thinking about buying one of those sleds so I don't have to mess around with the wedgie every time. And because I do this often, I've moved almost entirely to segmented kinds of work. So I'm always messing with my Jeep. This length, you can move back and forth. You can move it very precisely down to a 32nd of an inch, which with open segmented work is really important so that you can get all your lines to match up perfectly according to your cutting schedule. So you can take your strips, put them in this, run them through your table saw. I do that in the demo, but every table saw is a little different. And this one is set up for my saw stop at home and doesn't line up perfectly for David's saw here. When you purchase it without the rail installed, and then you put that on yourself, run it through one time, and then you've got a perfectly accurate sled in the future. The reason that there's two here is when you're cutting your segments for closed segment work, even after you've adjusted these, if you have any error whatsoever, when you cut your segments using this sled, you cut one angle, keep the wood in the same direction, bring it down here, move it up to your guide for your edge length, and then run it through the bottom, and it compensates for any error that might be in the sled. And you just keep doing that. Bring it up here, bring it down here, bring it up here, and cut your segments. What I do then, you can keep the camera where it is. I end up with bags of segments, and I mark each one. So this is row 3 of the piece, and all the segments for row 3 are in this bag. Row 7 is the one I'm going to be working on in a minute. Row 4. I cut all my segments before I start doing any glue ups or anything else. So for that one big piece, 36 rows, 36 bags. And I always cut at least 2 extra segments of each piece. You waste a little bit of wood, but believe me, it's a lot easier than when somehow you screw something up. You have to go back and reset everything to the right dimensions in order to cut that one segment that you need. So always cut an extra segment. I think we're done here. This is kind of a refresher. About a year ago, I did a demo making a pepper mill, which is all closed rings, all rings like this. So what I thought I'd do is just do a real quick assembly of one of those rings. Excuse me. And it's the only ring that you'll have to do for a segmented piece that's designed like this one, because only the top ring has to be a closed segment piece. I've got all my segments cut here, and at home I have a piece of Formica on my table, nice and flat, easy to clean, and I get a board that just has one nice flat edge on it, and I lay out masking tape or painter's tape, and I start taking my segments and I put them up against that tape. And I just can move very quickly. This particular piece has 12 segments in a row, so I can get them nice and tight with each other. 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So now I've got my 12 pieces for that particular ring. I have an X-Acto knife, which I forgot, but I got a little cutter here. Now I've got all of those pieces on the tape. I like to get rid of that extra tape, so I just come along. I'm kind of a miser, so I keep these little strips and use them for my next row. Now, what's nice is because I cut them on a wedgie sled, when I bring these around and touch one end to the other, I make a perfect circle. And if you put it up to the light and look at all the seams, I don't see any light whatsoever in that ring. Okay? If I did, then I would have to glue this up as a half ring, which I'll, so what you have to do then is, after the 6th segment, cut these 2 pieces of tape, or the tape, so you've got 2 rings or half rings of 6 segments. And then you got to get a little dowel or a little piece of wood to put in between the segments when you glue them. And you don't glue the 2 half rings together. But I'm going to go ahead and glue this one. And it's real slick. I just take a glue bottle and I put a little dab of glue on each segment. These little inexpensive glue spreaders are wonderful. They're like a little putty knife. But I can just go in and very quickly spread my glue. And sometimes I come around and do the other side real quick. I want a good glue joint. I don't chintzy up on glue. Glue's cheap comparatively. Now I can bring that around and use a hose clamp, put it around that ring, cinch it up, make sure that all my pieces are pressed down. I usually go to the back side and just run my finger around the edge to make sure everything is nice and even. If you don't tighten that up totally, you can kind of, If you feel a little high spot, you can just pinch it down. Tighten that up, and you've got a perfect ring. It's really a great way to make rings. I use regular tight bond, either 1 or 2, or I think that's what they are, 1 or 2, for my closed segment rings. It always held very well. David, could I get you to hand me one of those closed rings back there? Thank you. Here's a ring that's been glued up already. And if you notice, you probably can't with the camera, but those are just as good a seams as you can get. You want good seams. In segmented work, the joinery, in other words, the quality of your seams, is one of the most important things behind design. If you have an open seam or a seam where you can see the glue, your eye just seems to always go to it. And so I encourage you to spend time in making your rings as good as you can make them. Excuse me. Now again, if you're doing a closed segment piece, and I've done some with 48 segments and 35 segments tall, you end up with a lot of rings. And it's a lot of gluing. But I glue up all my rings ahead of time. And I just take them like this. I've got a rack above my table. I put them on a hook up there, and I let them dry for at least 3-4 hours. Usually I do my gluing one day, and then I let them dry overnight to make sure that my glue joints are really good.
Do you have 36 hooks?
I have 100 hooks.
Do you mark the segments when you hang them up?
Oh, yes, that's the one thing. I'm glad you mentioned that. When I have that strip with them on the tape, I take a little marker and I put the number in a couple of places along that strip of what one I'm making. Thank you, Jerry. That's really important, particularly when some of these rings are not very different from one another. You can spend a lot of time having to measure the diameter to make sure you know where it's going to fit in your piece. So yes, I absolutely have a marker, and do it on the inside, not on the outside edge, because the next step is to take this and run it through your drum sander. Don't ask me how I came to that conclusion, but I have done that before. I had them numbered out here, and then I ran them through the drum sander and had to do it all over again. Now, the one nice thing about open segmented work is that the majority of your work has to go into making sure that your strips are all the same size. When you cut your segments, if you have a little error in exactly what that angle was, you're really not going to be able to see it in your finished product because the pieces don't fit next to each other. They don't have to fit in that perfect circle. In fact, when I use the jig, instead of moving the wood from the top rail to the bottom rail in order to compensate for any error, I keep it at the top rail flip it over, cut it, flip it over, cut it. I can do it more quickly, and that little fraction of an error you'll never see in an open segmented turning. The thing you do need to do is make sure that you have your edge length accurate, because you want to make sure that your line from top to bottom is even all the way up. And if you mess up on your edge length, you're going to see a little bit of a waver in your line, and it'll still look okay, but it's not going to be the quality piece you want to sell at the next fair. Okay, we've designed a piece, we've developed a plan, a cutting schedule, we've cut our strips, we've cut our segments, and we've got everything nicely lined up so that we can actually assemble this open segmented piece on the lathe. So I think we are done with this table, and we will move over to the lathe for the rest. Let's see, can we move that one around too? So,
Dave, okay. Just get it framed in.
there we go. Okay. The next, by the way, all of the sources of the wedgie sled, the wedgies, the computer program are all on the handout that I believe you have access to. And I'll ask you to hand me those. Super. Because we still need our cutting schedule for putting the piece together. Back in the design portion, I also wanted to just mention that it's important to think about wood. You want to, when you're making an open segmented piece, some of your joints are only 3/16, quarter of an inch overlap between rows. You don't want any wood movement. So try to make sure that the boards you're using to cut your strips are dry. Wet wood does not work well because movement will really play havoc with any kind of segmenting, but open segmenting even worse, because you sometimes have some pretty small overlapping pieces that you're gluing together. The majority of this piece, in fact, only overlaps about 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch. In retrospect, I think that's a design error. I wish that I would have made my segments or my open portions a little bit smaller, and it would just make me feel more secure. Not that this piece is fragile, but I would feel more comfortable if the joints were a little larger than what I ended up with here. And that is particularly important when you're doing your final turning, because not only do you have then small joints, but you're trying to get your wall thickness down so that it's not too large also. The next big set of issues have to do with the assembly of the actual piece. And again, there's a number of approaches that you can use. The one I'm going to show today uses a jig that was developed by Chefware Kits, and it's how I will be laying out segments to glue onto the piece, and I'll show that in detail in just a second. But there are other approaches. Again, the people who came up with the wedgie sled and the wedgies for cutting the segments also came up with these discs. And each disc is for a different number of segments. Oh,
Not the screen.
I'm trying to show it to the camera here. For instance, this particular disc is 18 segments, and it has a fixed open graduated space. But you're stuck with that. If you want to go to 24 segments, then you have to buy another disc, and they charge you about $25 a piece. The advantage is you can put all of your segments into these various grooves. In the process of that, you'll check to see that you cut your angles properly, put a rubber band around it, and then you can either use a thing called a stomper, which was developed by the person who developed Woodturner Pro, and it has a pole that comes up and it moves up and down, and you bring your piece down onto that whole row at one time. You got to be pretty quick at gluing all 24 segments, and then you just press this down and put weight on it, and you can glue the whole ring up at once. Lots of people use it, but if you make pieces that have a lot of different numbers of segments, or if you want to make a piece that has the same space between every segment in every row, you have to buy a new disc for every one. And you can very quickly have $500, $600, $700 worth of discs, some that you may only use once. I chose to try a different approach, and it's worked for me. I'm not going to make too many of these, so I don't want to make the investment in these discs and the stomper. So instead, I got this jig. Now, it does not come with the chuck. That's just a regular drill chuck with a Morris taper. But
Right there, I'll use it on the camera.
okay. What's nice about it is it's got a ruler here that goes down to 30/2 of an inch, and a platform that you actually put into your lathe. When you purchase it for the lathe that you are going to be using. I use Powermatic, so it came with a post and a collar, so that I can just put that into my tool rest, and this will be perfectly flat. I have to adjust it the first time, but after the first time it's flat every time I put that post into it. And this allows me, you have to put in each segment individually, but I can change the width of the segment piece. I kind of have infinite capability of doing regular segments, even segments or proportional segments, and any number of segments in a ring with just this one relatively inexpensive platform. Again, I have that in the handout. Just the segment jig was $79. So that's about the price of 2 or 3 of those discs. And it came with the jig and the post. I also purchased an indexing wheel. And this is the indexing wheel. I got it from Chefware also. And it's a great wheel. It's got 6 rows here, 56 through 192 indexes. And of course, those can be, you could skip every other one. So you get a tremendous number of different spacings that you can make using an index wheel. I use this index wheel for open segmented turning, but also for basket of illusion indexing. And it works really good. Again, if you don't want to purchase an indexing wheel, which costs $59, you can make your own indexing wheels. These are, I use both, quite frankly. I've found that even though this wheel has a lot of settings and has actual holes in here so that you can hold the wheel steady at each index point with another contraption, which I'll show you in a second. When I'm doing basket of illusion, all I'm really using it for is to draw my vertical lines on the piece. And I often am using 120 or 140 lines around my piece. And I don't need to have it fixed because I'm not playing with the jig and the chuck. So I can print off my own graph, glue them onto a 1/4 inch, 3/16 inch plywood, and I can have any size graph that I want. And again, there's a really nice program. Where did I? I don't think I put that on my handout. I will send it to everybody after the demo. But you can use it for free. It doesn't cost anything. It leaves a watermark on here with the name of the company and everything, which is not a big deal. But for, I think it's $15 or $20, you can just buy the program, then you can get all the updates if it ever comes out. And it'll print out an infinite number of polar graphs and a whole lot of other graphs that you can use for laying out your work. So I made that $15 or $20 investment, and now I've got all kinds of these wheels, and I can throw one on wherever I want. I made a little thing that I can put on my lathe. I can't put it on the jet, but on my Powermatic, it fits right behind my chuck. I put the wheel in there, and this little needle goes directly to each of the lines on the index. So there's a lot of ways to do these things, and I'm sure you can find some others on YouTube. These two happen to really be slick. So print out your own, come up with a simple guide. I just use a clamp to clamp when I get to the index point, draw my line, move it to the next one. And sometimes I even just hold them by hand and move, because these projects are time consuming enough. Anything you can do to gain a little speed is helpful. I think this is called black cat graphs or something like that, but I will make sure everybody gets it.
Yeah, Dale had posted on here, he's a black cat.
Dale did? Oh, great. Thanks, Dale. Dale is the person who told me about it. So it's just a real slick way. I do like this one for open segmented work because from Chefware Kits I purchased one other item, and that is a little jig I can put on my lathe right behind my index wheel. It has a little mechanism here that you can pull back on. Turn your wheel, let it go, it clicks into the hole, and you've got a nice sturdy hold on your index point, and you just do that each time you want to move to a new index point. And with open segmented pieces, you spend a little bit more time at the chuck and have a little bit more of an opportunity to turn your index wheel inadvertently if it isn't captured in this jig. Again, there's some folks that you can see on the segmented wood turning website. It's a sister agency to the AAW. Pete Martin is one of the turners. There's several others. They are incredible. They do pieces that have 192 segments and 192 going horizontal and 192 going vertically. And they do incredibly intricate work, and they've come up with mechanisms where their index wheel sits at a table. They can turn it separate from their lathe, put down individual pieces, and they generally have those either for sale on their websites or the instructions on how to assemble them yourself. And they're all extremely helpful and want people to learn how to do this kind of work. I haven't graduated to that much of a meticulous piece, and I'm not sure I will, but their work is incredible. Okay, I'm going to take this off for a second and just actually do a piece here real quick. This is, so I can show you the gluing process what I first have to turn is my base. On my larger pieces, I generally put my base piece on a faceplate and use the faceplate with a, what do you call it?
Tenon?
A block in, and I glue my bottom to that, and then I can start assembling. With this little piece that we're demoing today, I just used a thick piece of walnut that I had, and I'm going to put on a small tenon. And put it directly into my chuck rather than using a faceplate. I just used a bowl gouge. I used this tool. It's a Glenn Lucas tool. I got it when he came here to demo one time. And all I use it for is to come in, and it gives me a perfect little angle on my piece so that it fits in my chuck. You can do it with a lot of other tools, but that one just works really slick. So I've got a tenon.
Let me switch cameras.
I'll turn it around. I'm only going to need 3/4 of this for my bottom row on my piece. This row right here.
Yeah.
So I'll do a cutoff there once I'm done. So now I have my first row in. I'll just square it up. I usually have a sanding board that I can hold up against it, which works good on all closed segment rings or regular turnings or on something like this. This is the sanding board that I use for open segment work. It's much larger. And the reason for that is that when you are going up to sand
You can move that.
a bunch of open segments, you want to make sure you don't get them caught on the edges of a thin strip when you're going back and forth sanding, because it can rip off one of those segments. So this one I just bring up. Now I've got a nice flat segment, and I just put 80 thread on one side and 120 on the other. I also put this little notch down here so that I can put that in the groove here on, I guess they call that the way of the lathe. And it can also be held that way so that it doesn't tend to rotate when you hold it up to the piece. I've gotten so I don't really need to use that, and I just hold it with my hand and just very gently go in until it's centered. Okay, so now I have my bottom piece. I can take off the chuck, put on the index wheel. Let's see, yeah. Put the chuck back on. Okay. here. Now this has 12 segments, and if I use the 120 hole ring on my index wheel, I know that every 10 holes is going to, if I go every 10 holes, it's going to give me 12 evenly spaced segments. So I actually take a felt pen, and I don't know if you can really see it, but every 10th hole, I put a little black mark right on the index wheel, and I did that with a black felt pen. Yeah, perfect. And then I know that I'm going to have to offset my second ring. So I find the center between two black dots. Oh, this will be confused. I marked every 5 or every 5 with a black tip. And then the center one, I marked with red. And I used the black on one row, and then I used the red ones on the next row, and then the black ones. And that gives me the alternating of the individual segments. We'll see that later. And then I have to, the first time, get this. Come on. Okay. This is the putziest part of the whole process, I think. Okay. Once you get this set, then you can just pull the little lever back and change your. So I'm going to put it. Not quite yet. There. That should do it. Okay. Now, as you'll notice, that holds it nice and tight. If I pull my little lever on the back, I can move to the next and go around the whole piece in that fashion. You, when you assemble this the first time, you put it in your drill chuck and you line up this ruler so that when this is brought up to the center, the very first line on your ruler is right at the center of your piece. And then you put a level on the jig here, and that needs to come down just a hair. Now I know I've got a perfectly level spot here. And when you put a collar on the post, you can take that in and out, and you don't have to make that adjustment every time. Oh, another little thing that I wanted to just show you. I put together just a little table for my lathe. I put some magnets on the back, and I can just lay that here, and it stays pretty steady. And that way, I've always got a workspace right next to my lathe, which is going to come in very handy. The first row, according to the cut schedule, is a solid piece. I've got that here. My first row, I've got my bag, my row 2, and I am ready to start assembling it. If you have more than 2 colors of wood, you have to make sure that you assemble this in line with the pattern that's on your design. I just did 2 to make this easy today. Of course, the easiest of all is use one kind of wood. You don't have to worry about it. But if you, it doesn't hurt to have these things out laying there so that you can be watching all the time. You don't want to glue something on and then have to take it off later. The other thing is when I'm doing open segmented work, you have the possibility of glue lines showing between the segments. And that can make a mess and look terrible if you don't watch out for it and clean it on a regular basis, and I'll show you how we do that. But to make sure even more, I use my preferred glue is translucent tight bond. It's a little hard to find. I couldn't find it at Woodworker Source or Woodcraft, but I got it on Amazon, and it's fast setting glue. It's a short cleanup time, or clamping time, I mean, and it's a very strong bond. And when you use it, even if you have a little bit of squeeze out that you might, you can barely see it. And so I recommend translucent. I used an awful lot of it, more than I anticipated, on that large piece over the last 2 days, and my Amazon shipment didn't come in time for the demo here, but I think I've got enough left in there to do it. The other thing I use often are index cards, and I have them sitting down there for my glue. And the other is go to Michael's and buy yourself a large supply of pipe cleaners. And they come a foot long. They're cheap. And I usually just take a handful of them and cut them in half. And I have a lot of pipe cleaners ready at hand, as well as a cheap paintbrush and a little thing of water and extra water. These seem like silly things, but cleaning up on a regular basis as you're assembling saves unbelievable amounts of work at the end. And the water gets dirty quick when you're dumping your pipe cleaners in there in order to get everything cleaned up. So these are just kind of tips that I think you'll find will pay off. On the first row, it's particularly easy to glue them on. So I just create a little puddle of glue, take my brush. On my plan, it indicates that the outside diameter of my second row is 2 7/8 inches. So I want to set this little stop guide right here on this ruler to the radius of the piece. So I'm going to take that 2 7/8, and I'm going to go up 1, and half of 7/8 is going to be 7/16. I adjust that, tighten this little screw underneath there, and this little stop now becomes the guide for making sure all the pieces are put on this base evenly. Now I can just start putting on a little bit of glue. You don't need a whole lot. You want to try to eliminate squeeze out as much as possible. So I just set that on there. I usually hold it to the count of 5, 6, something like that. I brought this jig up to about 1/16 of an inch away from my base. So if there's any squeeze out, it won't get on my ruler here. Now I can come up and go to my first stop on the wheel. I put on a maple piece. Now I'm going to put on walnut, and you just bring it up to the guide, make sure it's level on your piece. Hold it to the count of 5 or 6. Take your wheel, move to the next index.
So Brian, one of the viewers thinks you set the stop at 9/16 instead of where you wanted it. So you might double check your stops where you really want it.
Thank you.
If it's not too late.
Not too late. We'll just take that one off.
Okay.
That one's on there pretty good already. Fortunately, that you can do that.
Read your dive, you saved your bacon.
And it's not the first time that's happened to me. Good to have a radio. I don't recommend TV because you do have to pay attention. There we go. Sometimes I turn the index wheel a little bit too quick, and this one, particularly if it's hanging over quite a bit, drops down. I have to back up the wheel, put it back on. But those aren't really big problems. By the way, we're going to finish this whole piece, but I won't make you sit through watching the glue dry.
Probably take a break after this. That row's glued on.
Sounds like a good idea. It actually moves along pretty quickly. It's a little putzier to put the glue on when you're on a different row because you try not to put it where there isn't wood that it attaches to. Okay, walnut. It's actually not as boring when you're doing it as when you're watching it, because you're always doing the next step. And when you have 3 or 4 different kinds of wood making a pattern, you're really trying to be vigilant on which ones go in which sequence so that you don't end up with a mess. You just work your way around. You can kind of check where you are. I think this is going to be my last piece here. Okay, you can look underneath, and I'm done. You don't want to move your index wheel accidentally after the 12th piece, because you could push the one below it out of there. So you now back your wheel out. So interesting when you're doing demos like this that you get nervous and you forget about things. About every 3rd or 4th segment that I put on, I get a pipe cleaner and I rub the glue out. I don't want to see any glue in between my segments. And as you come in and moisten it, it leaves glue in the water. So don't be afraid to change your water quite often, otherwise it just kind of smears glue on your wood rather than cleaning it off. And it's easiest on this row because the glue is only squeezing out on the edge. I also usually double them over. I think it's kind of with metal. You bend it once, and then it's easier to bend there the next time. And if you just use the single one, it bends real easy. But this is about the best way to get these joints cleaned out. But now I don't, right there. I think I have all the squeeze out. If you do it between every 3 or 4 segments, it doesn't dry and set, and it's real easy to get the glue out. This thing, there we go. You can actually move right along. What I do usually is check with a ruler across 3 or 4 segments and see if I have a flat surface to glue my next row onto. If I see that there's a little bit of difference, then I'll need to sand this. And when you sand it, you have to pull this stop thing back. Again, I've not done that a few times. And then, of course, you have to realign it so that you can make sure that your segments are going to be good on the next row. But I'm just going to do 1 or 2 segments and that's it. But I know that now if I go in between the past notches on my index wheel, I went 10 holes times 12 was 120 hole circle. So now I have to go into the 5th hole and start using the red notches that I put on my wheel to put on the next series of pieces. I've got a white one here, and I'm doing an angular pattern. So I need to make sure I put a white one on here next. A maple one.
Did you have to change row,
Pardon?
the bag of rows?
The stop. The diameter.
Row 2, do you?
Oh. Yeah. It is easy to get mixed up. I made 3 or 4 of the same ones, so I have a lot of segments. Usually I've only got 1 or 2 segments left, and I know that I'm done. So now I'm on row 3. I know they're all cut right. Now,
Is it the same diameter?
it's the diameter on this one is 3 3/16. So I know that that's 1.5 plus, no, plus 3/32. Okay. Thanks, Jerry.
Richard got it too.
It really helps. Or is it Dale who keeps,
This was Richard. No, I caught it.
Richard,
But Richard did too. But all this distraction is
yeah,
helpful.
they
sir.
caught it. Now, when you're putting the glue on this piece, I put it on this edge and on this edge, but not in the middle. I don't want to have to clean out, glue squeeze out if I don't have to. So I put it a little bit on each one, and I put that segment down there. Now, I don't have nearly the surface stick that I had on the first row, or what is row 2 on the plan. And so I wait just a little bit longer between movements. And then a walnut one. Again, just putting it on the edge, and that's why it's nice to have a little paintbrush. In the meantime, I can be cleaning off the little nubs on the other piece.
You don't have an assistant that has it pre-glued?
It would be really good to have an assistant. But if I asked my wife to do that, that wouldn't be a good thing. Okay, now is the time, in fact, when it's good to clean off. And you have to do it on the top, but also on the bottom here, because now it starts to squeeze out in 4 places rather than just 2. So though it's putsy, you're busy all the time, making sure that things are clean. I should have asked Dale if he would have liked to come and do this for me. He's done some really nice open segment stuff. Okay, I think you've got the idea of how you have to start building this thing up. And I know that watching segments go on is not very fun. The tips along the way are, don't put on more glue on a segment than you need to, because it's just more you have to clean off. Use a lot of pipe cleaners, because after you've done a row or half a row even of these, the glue residue stays on it and smears on your wood, and that just causes you grief later, and it will show up in the finished product. Translucent glue does help, for it does hide the glue joint a little more than the yellow regular type bond. So rather than just keep doing this, I'm going to pull this away, and I don't need to take the chuck totally off.
We're ready for a break now, too.
Great, I'll just set up for the next set. What I've got is one that I did at home that has all of the pieces already glued on it. I just want to show the sanding of it. Then here's one that has all the rings except for the top. We'll put the top on it. And then I've got one more that has the top already glued on it, and it's ready to be turned. So that's where we are, and we'll come back in a little bit.
Set that up, and Pat, you want to go ahead and take it and do the gallery stuff and the drawing?
We will go ahead and do the instant gallery now then.
Yeah, I just did a little bit of coring with some avocado, and that's something that we get here in San Diego. It's plentiful, and it's kind of mystery wood too. You never know what the wood's going to look like. And then as I was rough turning each bowl out, I decided to core, do a single core, and I'm going to make little, I call them nightstand jewelry bowls, you know, where the people can put their earrings or whatever they want to put on the nightstand, and then be able to find it in the morning. And now I've got them all anchor sealed and in bags, drying up, and in about for the jewelry bowls, in about a month, those should be plenty dry, and the other ones probably take about 2 months, and then I'll finish those up.
Thank you, Roy. Roy's over in San Diego. Might have a little cooler weather over there. Okay, next up is Ed Jones.
I'm trying to unmute him.
Let's say, Ed, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. These are some pictures, not pictures, but a picture bases that I did when this has been going on. I've done like 12 of these so far. These are all open segment, 16 segments to the row. Some 16, 18 rows high. I use a very similar system, but boy, I do a different, I use a different, a little similar glue system, but boy, when I do my gluing up, I don't have to go back and spend all that time gluing up between there. But this is one of these pictures that's on my lathe, as you've seen there, ready to turn. However, the inside has been completely turned. The challenge to one of these things, to doing these, is figuring out how to finish the inside as you go along. So then when you do the outside, you got a pretty consistent thickness of wall thickness. So that's there's a picture of 3, 6, 7 of them. I think I'm up to number 12 right now. So I'm making Christmas presents.
Sounds good, Ed.
Merry Christmas.
Boy, I hope.
Anybody got any questions?
I gotta say, hit it in chat, or we'll do a question and answers. We'll open everybody's mic up later, so stick around, Ed. There might be.
Okay.
Thanks, Ed. Next, we have Jack DeHollow.
Hello.
Oh, there you go. You're on.
I'm on?
You're on. I can hear you. I just don't have a picture for you. There you go.
That's a little piece of oak mistletoe growing out of it. And when I moved here, it actually, before I moved it, the top was completely solid, but in the move, it broke off in the center on the top of the opening where I hollowed through. But I usually end up building jigs to stabilize these things, something like this, when I'm turning the inside. And I hot glue rings to the outside to hold it together. And then once the inside's hollowed, I just use the heat gun to pull the jig off. But it's a real challenge to do something like that.
You want your next piece?
Sure. That's just a piece of mistletoe again growing in a mesquite tree, and I had opportunity to end up with it, and it's just neat to do things with the little voids in it.
Sounds good. I gotta say, they look amazing.
Thank you.
So after Jack, we have Ken. But I don't see him signed in here anywhere. So we will come back to his later. I can't mute these things. And if Ken is here, we'll come back to him later, or he can talk during the open section. So I don't see him signed in anywhere as a Ken Thompson. So next we have Pete.
Hi there. I got in the newsletter, I had a work in progress, which is the one on the left here, right there, and the one there on the bottom. At the bottom of it, I put a piece of maple into the maple burl so that it would be a lighter colored wood, so you can sign it. Otherwise, on a dark colored wood, it's hard to sign. The one over here was a little mesquite branch that I had, but it had some variation in it because the mesquite branch had the pith off center. It allowed me to turn it and turn it longitudinally.
Very nice. So our next one up, let's see, is Rob Carlton, I think.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Hi. So this is just a maple burl that I ended up putting some blackwood feet on it, 3 of them specifically, and a blackwood top. Thing's extremely light. It's It's only I think it's 2 grams total weight, 2.3.
Wow.
But it's interesting.
How big is that?
Size of a softball.
Okay. Very nice.
Thank you.
So next up, we have George Brill.
Hi there. That's a piece of Texas blackwood that I've had for a long time, and I received that from a friend. So it was extremely dry, and for me, being a relatively new turner, it was extremely difficult for me to turn. But I made a jewelry box. It's about 3 3/4 inches tall and about 3 1/8 inches in diameter. And I just, really fell in love with the grain and the difference between the heart and the sapwood when I was turning that. And it started out to be a lot larger, but there were so many cracks and checks in it that's what I wound up with when I got done.
Very nice.
Thank you.
We have Richard January next.
This is a piece, and I don't know what the wood is, but my wife was at her sister's house and saw a hollow form that had bark on the outside, on the bottom, and she said, I want something like that. So that's what it is. It's I get a little overly aggressive, and in the waist, it's really, really thin.
I'm gonna say your next piece.
This is just a natural edge mesquite bowl. Just some wood I had. Actually, this is some wood I got up the street.
Well, that must have been free then.
Oh yeah. just the cost of some chainsaw gas.
Oh, that's always nice. Sounds good. We have Larry Juergens next.
Oh, my Halloween bowl. 10-inch silver maple. After turning, I took a 4-inch grinder and just started cutting out slots. And then I painted it black and I sanded it off, and started with yellow, then red, and then a little more yellow back on top. So just playing around with some airbrushing.
Very nice.
Okay. I can use it for Halloween candy.
Let's see, you got another one.
Okay. That one, okay, that's ash. And it was about 2 inches thick. I made a real shallow bowl, kind of a platter out of it. Then I painted in with an airbrush the 2 yellow butterflies, and then I put a monarch butterfly over the top of them. And then it's finished with a clear coat. So that's about it.
That's impressive. I'm gonna say there's getting comments out on the chat on people like all these good things. So Steve No is next.
Yes, good afternoon. I think a couple more weeks I'll be able to walk through my shop. I'm kind of getting it cleaned up. This is a little piece of burl that I found buried in a cabinet that I emptied out the other day. I have no idea what the wood is, but it looked pretty nice inside. So that's what we wound up with.
Wow, it's impressive.
Brian Lensink is next.
So Brian Lensink has a couple in here, and he is still setting up for the demo. So I will just show the pictures here. I'm gonna say it just looks too hard to me. and a cup of peppermint mills. So next we have Jim Metzel.
It's Myzelis.
Myzelis, I'm sorry. And you always have such an interesting end to your emails.
Well, when you're stuck in Illinois quarantine and our governor doesn't want to open anything up, you kind of get desperate when your wife complains about taking her measuring cups out of the kitchen drawer and for your granola in the morning. And then when you get tired of watching all the videos on the murder shows, I finally looked on YouTube and started looking for wood turning examples. And I finally stumbled across somebody making scoops. And so I've been making scoops for my granola in the morning. They are all cherry on the spokes, and in the center is a hardened maple.
Are they all different sizes?
And none of them are going to work the way I want, so I have to keep making more. Anyway, that's it.
Are they different sizes? They all look like different sizes.
They are all different sizes. There is two things. Is one, I picked up a cheap ball jig out of England. I want to say Mike Peace or somebody was selling it. Carl Jacobson demoed it about 7 years ago. And then you have to really turn good balls on for the scoop. And then there's a donut jig that I forget who did that. And that's what I saw on YouTube. And I went, oh, that solved the problem. And so it's a matter of then getting the depth right, and once you get them round.
Very nice. Thanks, Jim.
You're welcome.
Andy is next, and I do not see Andy logged in today. So we will go to Don Elliott. I can't, this is what's up, Dick. So Don Elliott, he's going to unmute you in just a minute.
Well, I decided I'd try my hand at the segmenting business, and I need a lot more practice. I know that. And I use cherry for the top and bottoms, and walnut and maple for the light and the dark wood.
Are these your first segmented?
Yes.
Wow. I gotta say, that's impressive. That's your first segmented. You really went all out, and the Beads of Courage will really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Say they have been totally closed down. We have some boxes, more boxes to take down to Tucson, but once they open back up, we'll get some more boxes down there, and then we'll collect them again in October from the club. So,
well, since I'm going back to Colorado, I won't have time before the October meeting when I get here, so I thought I'd better make them now.
Oh, good thinking. Yeah, people just keep making them, and we'll collect them and get them delivered. I've never been to an organization that was so appreciative of work being done by Woodturners as when we went down there and delivered those. So, very good organization. Thanks, Don. I think Dale's next.
Hi, everybody. This I turned from mesquite. This is 5 inches diameter to top and 8.5 inches tall, and it's turned down to about 3/16 wall thickness. When I turn vases, I like to have a size where I typically can put a glass container in or a plastic container to use it as a vase if you want to, have something that requires water in it at the same time. I think it's got 7 or 8 coats of spray acrylic on this. This is a piece of acacia. This was a crotch piece. That dark blob off on the kind of the right side was where one of the limbs was coming up to. That's the center of it. And you can see those little black lines in there. That kind of caught my eye. It started out to be a very large piece, but it wasn't too good a shape as I turned into the interior. I turned it wet, or excuse me, hollowed it wet. and sat on the bench for a couple of months and then went back and just smoothed up the outside. It deformed a little bit, but not very much.
Nice.
That's it.
Sounds good. I'm gonna say Martin is next.
Okay, this is a piece of mesquite, just a old piece of log that I found, and I liked what I saw when I started turning it with the bark sticking out and just rough and rustic, but it's just a beautiful grain in it and a nice little piece of wood. It's about 8-inch bowl that had to be heavy because I was getting too thin next to where the bark was. So
That bark makes it look impressive, though.
yes, it does. That's what sells. Okay, that's a piece of blackwood. When I was Woodcraft had when they had their show, a guy had a bunch of blackwood, African blackwood, and it's a piece I bought from him. It was a 16-inch piece, and I wanted to make it as big as possible. And I used double-faced tape on the wood to turn it so I could have it fairly thin. And it just, I love the grain in it. It's a great piece of wood.
Very nice.
Okay.
Thank you, Martin.
You bet.
So we have Beth Purdy next. And now let me tell you a little story. Maybe she might not want me to do this, but she just started in February. And she sent me some pictures, and she was like, you know, you don't need to post them, I'm brand new type thing. And so I said, are you really new? And she bought her lathe in February. And she had a couple pictures out when you're waiting for the meeting, and she's got a couple here. And Beth, I think you're on the phone. Are you there?
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Well, excellent. I was fortunate in that an olive tree went down in a friend's neighborhood, and so I got a lot of beautiful olive wood. And so this is a little, I don't even know what we call it. It's not really tall enough for a vase, but anyway, it was my first try at sort of a natural edge, and the olive wood is just a joy. It's so gorgeous.
That is very nice. And you also had?
And I think this was a kind of maple. Just made a little bowl for a friend. You can see on the inside, I'm still learning. I'm a lot better at the outside of things than the inside of things at this point. But this was a blast, and the friend I was giving it to was very happy.
That looks nice. We're going to say when we get back to meetings, I'm going to say everybody can meet each other, and we'll just keep learning more things.
Thank you.
Thanks, Beth. Hey, here's my husband.
Oh, Jim McCleary was supposed to be next, but I guess I'm up. I started last month. I showed you this one on the lathe. It's about 17 inches in diameter. It's a juniper that Jim and I went up to Globe and got, and this is an end cut.
Are you going to get on there?
When I put it on the lathe initially, it was about not quite 14 pounds. It now weighs 1 pound, 10 ounces. So I cut quite a bit of meat away from it, but it's kind of a S curve on the bottom of it. And I just like the pattern in it and the natural edge to it. So I'm still in the process of finishing it. So it's got a long ways to go yet as far as getting the right finish on it. And when Don Turcott moved back to Canada, he left me a big hunk of wood, and I put it on the lathe I bought from Don. And I asked out on Facebook, did anybody have an idea what it was? And the consensus was it was honey mesquite. So my wife said she'd really like a salad bowl. So it's going to be her salad bowl. It's about, the opening's a little over 9 inches, and it's about 4.5 inches tall, and the width at the bottom is about 11 inches. So again, I'm still in the process of finishing it. It's going to be finished with a salad bowl finish, so it's food safe.
There'll be lots of salads that can go in that big thing. Jim, now you're on.
Okay, well, we're gonna be going up the Globe and picking up some wood. So I went out and bought me a trailer down at Lowe's. They were on sale. I think it was $12.50 or something out the door. About $1,400 out the door. So it had the great mesh on the bottom. So I said, well, I went out and bought some 3/4 inch extreme weather plywood and primed and painted it with deck paint and put some sideboards on it, and actually made a haul to the dump with it today. So made its maiden voyage. So if you guys are going to be doing anything with carriage bolts, they've got a thing called a power washer that has a little square center in it, and it matches up to each one of the sizes, has little tabs on it, and you put that down there and wrap it with a hammer, and it sets it in there and keeps it from twisting out. It's the first time I've ever seen them, and I saw them right there by the carriage bolts, and they're a pretty handy little tool, but it made life a lot easier. This is a pedestal. I had a company call me up, and when they sent me that blank, it's 28 inches tall, 18 inches across. It weighed 108 pounds. So it was quite a struggle getting that up on the, I have a jack table that I got it up on the bedways, but I had to have my wife help me. I put a crowbar under it and she'd stick some pieces of wood on it, and finally got it round. And then I had to take it down to Gerard Merchant's place and turn it. It's about 16 inches across at the widest point, and it was in 2 pieces, and the bottom base is about 18.5 inches. So it was quite a project. So it took me, I probably got about 20 hours in it, but I thought it came out pretty good.
Impressive. Well, let's see if we can do a raffle here. So are we up now?
There you go.
Oh, okay. So this raffle is going to be for everybody who signed up to be here today. And Jerry, why don't you go ahead and unmute everybody? And so we can hear some excitement if somebody wins it, you know? Anyway, okay, so this is for a $20 Packard Woodworks. And we'll see what happens here.
Cool.
All right.
Slick.
Okay, Susan Carlton. I was going to say, I think it's Rob and Susan. Is that right?
We are a married couple.
Yep. I see you both on here and joined as a family. It's great. Okay, I'm going to remove you. Sorry. So we're going to do one more here, and we'll see. And then I'll do the instant gallery raffle later. One is for a $20 tree line, the woodcraft specialist. Well, it gets here.
All right, John.
Newbie wins. Thank you all.
Oh, good deal.
We're ready to go.
Hey, you're live.
We're on. You're using that camera, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. During the break, we put on another 3 rows. And I think that it turned out pretty good. We now have to put the top row on. And I thought we would do that very quickly. What I noticed when I was looking at the evenness, the walnut segments are a little bit lower than the maple. So I'm going to see if I can't use my sanding board here. That was 80 grit. And that was 120. We'll take another look. This is the one solid ring, and we now have to put that on. And again, the challenge, of course, is to center it. So I use a live center with a cone on it here. And again, we want to try to get as little glue squeeze out as possible. So, and I have to put it on all the pieces at one time. So in this particular case, I like to just use my finger and put it on the end of each of these pieces.
Why is that easier than the paintbrush?
Pardon?
Why is that easier than the paintbrush?
Because I don't have to be as precise. I don't know why. I found this easier.
Okay.
Okay. And I'll bring this up. And I try to put it on with the segment lines being uniform. They don't fit perfectly around the piece, but you can still make them uniform. And then just tighten up that to the rest of the piece. And what we'll do is we'll take it off in just a minute and put a little weight on one end rather than waiting at home. I just let that sit in my lathe for 10 or 15 minutes and do something else. I don't want to start turning the final piece until that top piece is really dry. And I have one that already has the top piece on it, and that's the one we'll use.
Just squeeze out around the
edge. And the squeeze out is very important to get out now. By the way, one other thing that happened last time was I put my paintbrush down with all the intentions of cleaning the glue out of it. And of course, like I do way too much, I forgot. So if you can remember, clean your glue out, your brush out each time. You don't have to use quite as many brushes. There we go. It's all cleaned out. I'm gonna take this out earlier than I normally would. And if we could just set something a little bit weighty on one end there, that would be fantastic. So the one that already has the top ring on it, I will put on the lathe. And I'm going to support the end for the outside here with my cone again to do the turning. And I'm going to kind of rough turn it on the outside. The trickier one is the inside. And I thought I'd just mention a few tools that I like to use. Squeaky. I don't need this table anymore, so we're going to just take that out of here too. You got to be careful with an open segment piece because there's just many more opportunities to get a tool catch. And when you're turning open segmented pieces, speed is really your friend. I like to turn at 2000 or higher when I'm doing the open segment pieces. It kind of fools the tool into thinking that it's a solid piece that it's working on. Generally, I use a half-inch bowl gouge, probably most often. There's another tool that I wanted to mention that I found to be really nice on open segmented work, and it's in the handout again. It's a Hunter, there, a Hunter #2 Osprey. That's what Hunter Toolworks calls it. And it's got a carbide tip, the kind that, not the type on an easy wood tool, but it's got the a cutter edge on it. And it also has a back section here that you can ride the bevel on it. So it's not a scraping tool, it's a cutting tool. And it cuts really nice. I've really only had it about a month and a half, and I'm starting to use it almost as much as I do my half-inch bowl gouge on finish work because it leaves such a nice cut on it. And open segmenting is harder to sand than regular work, so I really try to get the best edge I possibly can or the best finish on it. Another tool that I like to use, particularly on the inside, is this is a Jimmy Clues tool. It's called the Mate, and it's got a carbide cutter again, the same type as that Hunter tool, but it's on a fixed bar. You don't ride the bevel with it, and it does a nice job, particularly way inside on an open segmented piece. And it's at an angle. I don't know if you can see that, but unlike the easy wood tools that are straight across, these are set at an angle, and it's a much more forgiving tool. I wouldn't want to stick an easy wood tool in there. I think you'd almost certainly get a catch unless you use the easy wood tool with the
negative edge scraper.
Yeah, negative edge scraper tip on it. That one I can use on the inside and on open segmented bowls with a very light cut, and I have not gotten any catches with that, but I wouldn't want to put a regular scraper in there. The other thing is I found a great use for a bunch of old Benjamin Best tools. I just made a whole bunch of different sized negative rake scrapers out of them, and I use them all the time. Um, I've got probably 4 different widths, some really narrow ones, and that negative rate, they may not last as long as a higher quality tool, but I've really found a great use for them. So I use those on the inside, particularly down at the bottom to clean up. And with the negative rate, I don't seem to have any problem. Again, I used a fair amount of speed, and that helps. So I'm going to go ahead and attempt to turn this. The other thing that I noticed is when I made this one for the demo, I have 4 levels and then the final ring. On this one, I have 5 plus the final ring. So I'm having to reach in longer than I would like to. But I usually, when I'm making a larger piece, like the ones I showed you at the beginning of the demo, I'll put on 4 or 5 rings, and then I'll turn the inside and the outside as I'm building up. But I'll never touch the top ring of the open segmented piece without a solid top ring on it. I've done that once or twice, and I've inevitably chipped off a couple of segments. So it's really helpful when the segments are supported by more open segments or by a closed ring at the top. I'll start with the regular bowl gouge. I'm up at 2,000 RPM. By just taking the high points and bringing them down to the low points on the ring below it. So I can get the majority of the material out of there before I start to really
What your goggles on?
Oh. Yeah. I actually do wear goggles at home. I usually use the full face mask, but here, I didn't know whether I was going to be wearing a mask, and I thought the goggles would be just as good. So. Now the bottom piece is not a waste material. That's my bottom ring, so I can go ahead and start shaping the bottom of my piece. Short on the tool rest there. We'll see how we're. Okay, the outside bottom is actually pretty much where I want it, and the cut on it is very clean. Now I've got to bring the top. It has kind of an inward curve on it. Look, I see a little high stop right in here. So I'm going to use a negative rate scraper Just a little bit high. Now I can come over and bring the other side down. I think you probably all know that if you really want to see the shape of your piece, you don't look at the tool, you look at the top end. And it's a tool where you think you might need to round things out just a little bit more. Actually, that is just where I want this piece to be. So now I'll adjust the wall thickness when I'm doing the inside. Any questions? I haven't gotten any questions.
I can't unmute everybody so we can ask.
Pardon?
I'll unmute everybody and hey, everybody's unmuted. One at a time.
Okay. Now we've got to get on the inside. You have a tool rest that's a little bit wider.
Is this what you're going to finish?
That'll be overkill. Okay. Now, I'm going to start here using this tool by Jimmy Clues. And I am going to try to, the largest overhang I have inside the bowl is on that very bottom ring. And I want to get that out of the way. Right? Yep. Yeah, there we go. Those are great lights. You get them at IKEA for about $12. And you could put a couple of little magnets on the bottom, glue them on the bottom, and they'll stick on your lathe any place you put them. Okay.
Is he under his head?
I got the large gap off, so I'm going to start at the top. And hope I don't blow this up. I'm going to move over to this hunter tool. what I like about this hunter tool is you can ride the bevel along. And it cuts very nicely. Always a challenge. A bunch of junk in there. Okay. And I didn't bring a caliper, but oh, look at here. I like that. Watch, very perfect. I've got about a quarter of an inch gap, and my first ring is pretty flat, and I've taken out that first joint.
Right?
Yes.
Morris wonders if you use a captured tool for deeper vessels.
Yes, it does work well. You could use a hollowing tool in here.
Yeah.
Getting the surface as nice and even is, to me, harder with a hollowing tool.
Yeah.
So if I can use, it would probably be good to use a hollowing tool to get your basic shape, but then you probably want to go in with a final finishing cut using some other tool. But yes, a lot of people use the hollowing tool. The advantage of open segmented is you can actually visualize your wall thickness through the hole. And it's starting to work its way down. Always scary. Yeah, got two rows down there. Pardon?
Do you need a vacuum? Are you right?
I'm okay. I'm gonna take a regular roll down here. Vacuum again.
Here we go.
use that Jimmy Cool tool again. Again, if I would have done the glue up at home, where I'm not putting you through watching glue dry, I would have probably turned that bottom a little bit rather than trying to turn it when it's out sticking 6 inches. But it's actually coming quite nicely, so hopefully we can keep this going. With an open segmented piece, you've got your thinnest part of your vessel down here toward the base. So you don't really want a wall thickness that goes the string. Oh, okay. That you don't want a wall thickness that is kind of the same thickness all the way down to the bottom. It actually looks nice to have that curve so that the bottom is more well supported when you're done with your turning. And I've almost got this turned just where I want it. One more time with this. Then I'm going to kind of finish it off, and I can actually see through the piece that was the negative breaker. Feel it in there. The last row, the second to last row is just a little bit high. That actually is done.
How do you sand the inside?
If you're going to sand, again, yeah, feel, oh, I've got to do that yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The sanding is tricky when you're doing an open segmented piece. And when I forgot to bring it, but I have one of those firm sanding pads that I've cut into a narrow piece, and I wrap the sandpaper around that, and then I stick it in, but you got to make sure that the edge is curved over so it doesn't get caught in one of these holes. It's best if you can use your negative rate scraper and get your finish down to where you basically don't hardly need to do any sanding. And I just get a nice burr on the end of that negative rake scraper and take very gentle cuts. And I don't really need to sand these down here. They're really very nice right now. But on the other one, on another one, on the outside, I can use my power sander. What I got to be careful of is I'd use a 3-inch disc, and I'd make sure that I hold it so that the outside edge of that disc doesn't dip down into one of these holes. And here I've got just a little bit of tear out. I'd probably stop the lathe, sand that out, and then just even it back out again. But I didn't bring my sander, so I'm not going to do that today. The other thing you can do is just put sandpaper on a board again and bring that up to you just want to make sure that you don't get your sandpaper caught in it. It's not that it'll necessarily hurt your bowl, but you'll need a new piece of sandpaper. But if you, now, when I was doing this edge up front, I ran in, I got a little tear out of my tool. So I'm just going to use a negative rake scraper. Just a little bit more. And the other thing is I want to round these edges here. And the inside edge. You have a little piece of sandpaper?
What kind of group do you have? 120?
Yeah, better. Charlie wants to go to that.
120. Now I can reach in here for my top ring. I've got the lid going way too fast here. I have to go in with another great scraper again and get that top rim. There's a little groove I put in there. And do that. Thank you. I want to support this piece on the outside. Again, if you make sure that this top edge is curled over nicely, you can do a little bit of sanding in there. And it's easy to sand the outside like that. I think we got ourselves a bowl. And now parting tool. You think you have everything ready to go, and you forget that. Okay. We'll now come down here, take my little ruler, and I'll measure. Go over another half of a okay. More speed. Harden it off, and what I generally do with a little one like this, and I don't know if I've got a couple of chucks on, but might not get small enough.
Okay.
So close, but so far. I would reverse chuck this and put this end onto my chuck so that I can then turn and decorate the bottom. I have another set of jaws on a different brand of chuck that will make a little bit smaller circle. And I can just expand it gently on that. What I often do bring tailstock up. Have that on the chuck, the tailstock up kind of gently. Now I'm supported here. I don't put pressure on the whole piece as I'm moving. Oh, perfect. Let's just do that. Oval chuck here, that's what I use at home. This very problem. And set up. Now what I do is just clean up the bottom edge. I like to put a little recess on the bottom and slant it down. Then I would clean that up with a now it's pretty sturdy.
Ryan, does one ever come apart when you have it reverse chucked like that?
Say it again?
Have you ever lost one? Has one ever broken while you're?
No, I haven't. But I don't put a lot of cross pressure on it. Instead, I use the negative rate scraper. Probably I'll lose one today. And I take light cuts. All my pressure is going into the bowl, straight in. So I'm not putting sideways pressure, so I knock it off the chuck. And I'm really being gentle with it. And if I were at home, I've got a really small fingernail grind spindle gouge that I can go in and get that little nub there about a 32nd of an inch while the tailstock is still up to it. So I don't really have hardly any risk, but seeing that I don't have that right at the moment, actually I think I'm okay now. I'd even go smaller than that. Now, what I've got a nice straight edge here. Got just a little bit of the raised part right in the center. Another tool that I use often is it's a very pointed tool because I have kind of a signature approach to the bottom. So I'm going to try this. It's not what I would normally do, but I just, on all my pieces, I like to put 3 little rings with this little V tool, and then I put 2 on the outside, real close together, so it almost looks like a bead. And then I sign all my pieces. I started in 2012, kind of late in that year, and I've kept track of every piece I've made, except for things like handles and things like for bottle stoppers, I don't number, but I number all my pieces. And I turned number 675 the other day. That probably needs to be sanded just a touch more, but the bottom looks pretty good. I'd like to just kind of round this edge so it doesn't get banged up. So you end up with a little open segmented vase. I guess if you want to make $30 on it, you call it a vase. If you want to do $20, you can call it a vase. All of the principles that I went over today are the exact same things you do for making a very large piece or a small piece. It's varying the size of your segments, changing the arrangement, making the gap different, putting in a lot of different varieties of wood, much like Ed showed in the photos over the break. You can come out with all the same shape, but a lot of different variances in what they look like when they're done, just by varying the wood you use. And you can also vary the size of the segments. You could put a solid ring in the, let's say you put a solid ring in here as kind of a feature ring. There's just lots of things you can do with segmenting in general and open segmenting also.
The question of what you will use to finish it.
Oh, almost all the time I use satin lacquer. I can just set that on a table and put a very light coat and slowly across it. It gets inside the segments. And I do the same on the inside. This piece, would you hand me that one, please? Thank you. Now this piece was turned, I had this on a faceplate at the top, and I had this on a faceplate, and I built my segments up in both directions and then put it together in the middle. Before I put it together, I sanded the inside of both halves and I sprayed it with 3 or 4 or 5 coats of lacquer, and it got somewhat in these holes, but it gets in the holes better on the outside because there's this slant that allows them to be hit easier. So anyway, lacquer's the easiest. You could do it with some kind of a hand finish, but then you'd have to go in, kind of like when J. Paul Fennell does his pierced pieces. He goes in with a little paintbrush and paints all the edges of every little piece that he cuts out. And I do have some small brushes that I can use to do that on this type of work too, but it would be terribly tedious. And you'd also have the problem again of if you got a little bit of runoff over the edge, you'd have to figure out a way to get it cleaned out on the inside. So I think that the spray lacquer, other people have used spray acrylic lacquer or just acrylic, water-based polyurethane. You could, I would imagine you could use polyurethane too. But, and I usually try to stick with satin for a lot of different reasons. I like satin because I think it shows off the wood better and makes it look more like wood than plastic. I also like to keep the gloss down so that because these are harder to sand to the degree that you can sand a closed segment piece, there could be some little imperfections that if you put gloss on, gloss tends to amplify those imperfections. So if I can use a flat or satin finish, if there are some imperfections, they get hidden easier. And I think that's better. But I don't know if you can see the inside of this at all. But it's rounded on the bottom, and the finish is really quite nice with a nice sharp negative ring scraper with a good burr on it. So, turning them is really not difficult. I do recommend that get comfortable with a little more speed. You'll be much happier with more speed when doing an open segment piece. But you do have to get used to speed. And if you're scared of speed, you can have more chance of a catch of some sort. But be sure to use the right tools. And a bowl gouge is the most riskiest of all the tools to get down to the bottom of a vase like this, unless you're used to using it and you don't get catches. I've now gotten to a point where I don't think I've had a catch in the last year, and that just comes from a lot of practice.
Be doing next month.
Yeah, right. Okay, well, thanks, and
great job.
maybe I'll finish this off and we'll raffle it off next time.
Are there any more questions? I'm going to say if we get them in the chat, or we can get it in, you can raise your hands also. Be sure and I'm going to say I think we should try unmuting everybody again and give Brian a round of applause.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Pete.
The question I had was, do you ever have a problem with different density woods and over time expanding and changing the shape of it?
Is that right?
What was the question?
Repeat it, Pete.
Do you ever have a problem with different density woods in your segmenting, that it changes the shape of it or tends to crack?
He's wondering if you have a problem with different density woods, turning different or finishing different, anything.
I usually use very hard woods. Actually, walnut isn't a particularly hard wood compared to bubinga or wenge or whatever, but I really haven't had any trouble with any of them. I don't find them to be much of an issue, at least in this kind of work.
Yeah.
A really nice wood is this spalted tamarind. It just cuts nice and finishes nice.
Okay, see if anybody else have any questions? You can type them or raise your hand.
Hey, we'll do the other raffle, and I also have Andy that came on. Can Andy tell me his last name? There.
Yes.
What's the last?
Andy Pulsifer.
Okay, Andy, hey, did you want to, we missed you in the,
That's okay.
no, we're gonna have you tell about it. So here you go. So Andy, talk about your work.
This is a few pieces of scraps that I had sitting around, and I was not willing to throw them away, so I started gluing them together. And this turned out to be a fun little project for segmenting blackwood, because you really have to glue the joints tight, and when it's all done, it looks like a single piece, and so there's no joints on it. And so this is just an amalgamation of a bunch of little pieces of scrap wood that I had, and I'm very pleased the way it came out.
Very nice. Here we go. Okay, so see, Larry, we started. So I don't know if that's good luck or bad luck there. So there goes.
Peace. All right.
Good job.
So we had Steve on that one.
What did I win?
Oh,
$1 million.
I forgot to tell you, didn't I? You win a $20 gift certificate to Packard Woodworks.
Ah, fantastic.
So, and the next one is, I'm going to remove you now, sorry. The next one is for Penn State Industries. It's a $25 gift certificate. Oh, look at, oh, Larry. You still on here somewhere? Or did you leave us? I gotta say, I was talking to him earlier, so he's here. So, sounds good. I was gonna say, Jerry, do you have anything else, or does anybody want to talk with each other? I think everybody is unmuted now. No? If anybody has any other questions, enjoy your day, and we're done with the meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Good luck. Thank you all. It was awesome.
Great meeting. Good job.
Thank you.
Thanks.